I had always loved hiking, especially in the more remote parts of the forest where the trails were less trodden, the air fresher, and the silence unbroken. There was something about being completely alone in the wilderness that appealed to me. It was freedom, a break from the clutter of modern life. So when I discovered a new trail deep within the woods, one that wasn't marked on any of the maps, I didn't hesitate. I figured it would be a chance to explore something untouched by other hikers. As soon as I stepped off the known path, the trees closed in around me, their branches forming a canopy so thick that even the sunlight struggled to break through. It was as though I had stepped into another world, one where time moved differently, slower. At first, the trail was easy to follow, just a narrow, winding path between the trees covered in fallen leaves. My footsteps echoed softly in the stillness, and I found myself enjoying the solitude. But as I continued, the path began to change. The ground became uneven, leaves thicker, hiding roots that threatened to trip me with every step. The trees, too, seemed to grow closer together, their trunks gnarled and twisted in strange ways. I checked my phone, no signal. That didn't surprise me, I was deep in the woods by now. But I wasn't worried though. I had a compass, and I knew how to retrace my steps if needed. But then I noticed something strange. The birds had stopped singing. The forest was dead silent. No rustling of leaves in the wind, no distant calls of wildlife, nothing. I stopped listening. All I could hear was the sound of my own breathing, growing a little more uneasy by the second. It was like the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. I shook off the creeping anxiety and pressed on. The trail had become more overgrown now, the trees thicker, their branches twisting in odd directions like the outstretched arms of some deformed creature. The air grew damp, and the smell of earth and rot became stronger. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that it was just an overgrown part of the forest I hadn't seen before. But as I moved forward, something else became apparent. The path was changing. No longer was it a simple trail carved through the woods. The ground was muddy now, slick with moisture, and the trees, they were wrong. Their bark was blackened, as though charred by fire, yet there was no smell of smoke. The leaves overhead had turned a sickly yellow, despite it being summer. Then I noticed the carvings. At first they were subtle, small, shallow etchings in the bark of the trees. But as I walked, they became more frequent and more intricate. Strange symbols, spirals, and runes I didn't recognize. They looked old, ancient even, as if they had been there long before any hiker had set foot in these woods. A chill ran down my spine. I wanted to turn back, but when I glanced over my shoulder, the path behind me seemed to have changed too. It looked darker, more twisted, and the symbols on the trees seemed to have multiplied. Panic gripped me, but I forced myself to breathe. I just needed to keep calm. I could still find my way out. I continued forward, hoping to find something familiar, but the forest had transformed into a labyrinth. The trees seemed to shift when I wasn't looking, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The symbols on the trunks now glowed faintly in the dim light, casting eerie shadows that danced along the ground. My footsteps quickened, though I didn't know where I was going anymore. The path had vanished completely, swallowed by the forest. Every turn I took led to more twisted trees, more glowing symbols, and the oppressive silence grew heavier. Then I heard a faint whisper. At first I thought it was the wind, but there was no wind. The whisper was soft, barely audible, but unmistakably there. It seemed to come from all directions at once, wrapping around me like a cold breeze. I stopped in my tracks, heart pounding in my chest. The whispering grew louder, though I still couldn't make out the words. It was like a chorus of voices overlapping, speaking in a language I didn't understand. I turned in a circle, shining my flashlight into the trees, but saw nothing. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. It was quick, darting between the trees, just at the edge of the light. I spun around, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever it was, but it moved too fast. My breathing became shallow, my palms slick with sweat as I gripped the flashlight tighter. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and pathetic in the vastness of the woods. "Is anyone there?" No response. Only the whispering growing louder now, more insistent. I started walking faster, almost jogging, but no matter which way I went, the forest only seemed to grow denser, the trees closer, the symbols brighter. My legs felt heavy, like I was wading through thick mud, though the ground was dry. Panic clawed at my chest. I had no idea where I was, no idea how to get back. Suddenly, the whispering stopped. For a moment, the silence was deafening, oppressive. Then, from the darkness ahead, I saw it, a figure, barely visible in the dim light. It stood motionless between two twisted trees, watching me. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. The figure was tall, its outline human but wrong in some way. Its limbs were too long, its posture unnaturally stiff. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, but I could feel its eyes on me, piercing through the darkness. I took a step back, my flashlight flickering. The figure remained still. I took another step, then another, my movements slow and deliberate, as though any sudden motion would provoke it. My back hit the trunk of a tree, and for a second I thought I was trapped. Then, without warning, the figure lunged. It moved impossibly fast, a blur of black against the shadows. I turned and ran, heart pounding in my ears. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees reaching out to grab me, the symbols flashing like fireflies in the night. I could hear the figure behind me, its footsteps silent but ever present, growing closer. I didn't stop running until I burst through the trees and stumbled onto a familiar path. My legs were burning, my chest heaving, but I didn't dare look back. I ran until the trees thinned out, until the sky opened up above me and the sounds of the normal forest returned. When I finally stopped, gasping for air, I turned around. The figure was gone, but I could still hear the whispering, faint and distant, echoing through the trees. And somehow, I knew I would never truly escape.